Chapter 8. The Tale of the Dervish and the Fakir. One day, a fakir came in through one door, and I gave him a gold coin. The next day he came in through the second door, and I gave him 2. Realizing that it was the same man, I nevertheless gave them to him, and in the same manner, daily, he started to enter that house by door after door, increasing his requests, 1 gold piece at a time, until he arrived at the 40th door and asked for no less than 40 pieces of gold. I gave it to him. The following day he was at the door again, asking for 1 gold piece. When I saw him, I was most annoyed and said, "Listen to me, fakir, what kind of greedy individual are you? Your behavior should be in accordance with the name of poor." He said, "Very well, you tell me what that means." I said, "It means abstinence, drawing back, and being contented with your lot. Unless you understand this, you are not a fakir. This money is for helping those in need, not for hoarding. Not only have you received 40 times, each time, more and more coins, but now you start all over again. What are you going to do with all that money? Is this the kind of teaching which your guide has given you?" As soon as I finished this speech, he became enraged, throwing down every penny that I had given him. He shouted, "Take back all that you have given, and mind your temper. It is hard to be generous. Learn the bases of generosity, and then act upon those bases." This made me feel uncomfortable, and I said, "Tell me what these are." He said, "Before you can be generous, you must have 3 qualities which you practice, just as in poverty. These are endurance, fear of the divine, and remembering. Until you have these, do not try to be generous. A generous man, even though he may do wrong, is a friend of God. Although I have travelled through many lands, I have never met a truly generous person other than the Princess of Basra. She is clothed in the celestial garment of generosity. All wish for the name of it, but none really practices true generosity." As soon as he had spoken, I begged him to forgive me and to take the money, but he went on his way, saying, "Even if you were to donate your entire kingdom to me, I would not even use it for spitting on." I now had a great desire to see the Princess of Basra. In the meantime, the king, my father, had died, and I ascended to the throne. I had inherited the empire, but the idea of going to Basra was deep in my mind. At last I collected my Amirs and Viziers, my commanders and ministers together, and told them I was going. They did not seem very pleased at my plan, but I dressed as a fakir and took to the road alone. In a few days I had reached a halting stage not far from the city of Basra, and whenever I stopped for the night, servants of the princess waited upon me, providing me with food and drink in profusion. In this way I travelled in comfort for quite a while, until I entered the city at last. I had no sooner entered it when I was approached by a handsome young man who said, "I am he who is set in a position to be the friend and servant of all travellers, whether they be pilgrims or merchants, who come here. Please, holy man, come to my house and allow me to take care of you." "Tell me," I asked, "what is your name?" "I am Bedar Bakht, wakeful fortune," he answered. I went along with him and soon arrived at his home. It was a magnificent palace with everything of the finest. He made me sit down within and sent for a servant to wash my hands and feet. A white linen dining cloth was then laid on the floor, and the choicest of foods were brought in. I took a mouthful from each dish, and soon my stomach was full. I could eat no more and drew back my hand. The young man said he was sorry that I had eaten so frugally and pressed me to continue. I shook my head and blessed him for his hospitality. Then he sent for water cooled with ice, flavoured with limes, and I drank. The cloth was removed, and huge gold basins and ewers for washing the hands were brought in. When evening came, scented candles with glittering glass shades were brought, and that friendly young man entertained me until bedtime. I was offered a huge bed with curtains and screens, though I requested only a deerskin or even a mat on the floor. But at last I lay down on the bed, which was softer than anything I had ever slept on before. Pots of roses were put at each side of the bed, and perfumed incense cones were burning in the room all night. When morning came, I had placed before me pistachios, grapes, walnuts, figs, currants, dates, and iced sherbet made of choice fruit juices. In this manner I passed 3 days and nights. On the 4th day I was about to leave, when the young man said, "Have I been deficient in hospitality, that you are no longer pleased to stay?" I was amazed, and said, "Surely etiquette requires that a guest stays only 3 days and nights, and departs on the 4th. "Wait," said he, "that I may go to the princess and tell her that you are going. All that is in your room, wearing apparel, gold bowls and dishes and jade goblets, are yours to take away with you, so I shall have them packed for you." "Stop," I cried, "I am a pilgrim and not a wandering vagabond." "Sir," said he, "if your refusal should come to the ears of the princess, she would discharge me at once, and God knows what other punishments I should receive. If you do not want these things, please put them in one room here, and put your own seal on that door, so that you may dispose of them as you please later on." He was so persistent that at last I agreed, and stamped the wax on the door with my personal seal ring. In the meantime, another functionary, with a fine embroidered robe and a gold mace, came to me and begged me to come to his dwelling, that he could give me hospitality. He stated, "The princess should hear that a traveller has been here, and has not been received with total courtesy and kindness. God knows what punishment will be meted out to me." At last he persuaded me to go with him, and I arrived at another palace, even more gorgeously appointed than the last. After the 3rd day, I was told once more that everything which I had used was my own property now, and that I might take it away with me. "How can I desire the things of this world?" I asked in exasperation. "I am a pilgrim, and need nothing but my robe and sandals." I added, "I really want nothing, but, if you like, I will write a note to the princess, telling her that I have received such generous hospitality in Basra as I can never forget." I took pen and paper and wrote, "I have heard of your Highness's great generosity, and have enjoyed it from the moment of my arrival here. And now I wish to state that I am a king in my own country, having come hither solely in order to see you. I hope through your benevolence to attain the desire of my heart. If this request is not granted, I shall continue to wander, perhaps forever, to sacrifice my restless life in my passion for you." Having given the note to be delivered to the princess, I waited with my heart in my mouth. After what seemed an eternity, I was conducted to the door of the Seraglio. Inside I saw an elderly and charming lady, dressed in fine silks and many jewels, upon a golden sofa, surrounded by eunuchs and slaves. I imagined her to be the superintendent of the harem, and saluted her accordingly. "Come and sit down," she said. "It was you who wrote to the princess?" I hung my head and felt ashamed, but she answered kindly, "The princess has sent you a message." "There is nothing wrong in my taking a husband, but to talk of yourself as a king in your own country, and to be proud of it in this mendicant state, is quite out of place. But, as you are indifferent to worldly riches, and God has given me such wealth as cannot be counted, then we might make a good match of it. But there is a task to perform before we are married." "And what is that?" I asked. "Remain here at the palace today, and tomorrow I will tell you," said the old lady. I accepted, and, taking my leave, came out of the Seraglio. That evening I joined all in a great feast at the palace, and a slave called a man named Bahrawa, who was told to sit beside me. "O Bahrawa, relate to this stranger all that you have seen," said the slave. "O friend," said Bahrawa, "our princess has many thousands of slaves, and among them I am one of her humblest hereditary servants. She regularly sends us to several parts of the world with goods and chattels, and we return with established trade in those foreign regions. The princess, in her own time, hears from each individual, now and again, what happens in each country. Once it happened that I went to the city of Nimroz in Persia, where there appeared to be some great trouble. All the people were dressed in mourning and wept continuously. No one would tell me what was wrong. One day, everyone, young and old, timid and bold, fair and ugly, came out of the city and massed together on a flat piece of ground. The king, mounted on his finest steed and surrounded by his courtiers, came with them. I followed to see what was the reason of this assembly. In a short time, a young man, mounted on a huge, dun-coloured bull, seemed to come from nowhere. He dismounted and sat down on the earth with the halter of the bull in one hand and a naked sword in the other. A young attendant was with him, and he gave him something to take round and show the people. What it was I could not see, but I noticed that as each one saw it, whatever it was, loud weeping and wailing was the result. Then, passing along the line of people, he returned to the man with the bull. No sooner had he approached his master than there was a flash of the naked sword, and the servant's head was detached from his body with one stroke. The dun-coloured bull was remounted by the handsome young man, and he galloped off very quickly. When he disappeared, the inhabitants returned to the city. I asked everyone I met what was the reason of this cruel ritual, but no one would answer me. I went to the princess and told her what I had seen, from beginning to end. She herself, being very puzzled too, had been most anxious to find out the meaning of the ceremony. The old lady said, "For this reason, she had made it a condition that whoever wishes to marry her must first find out the truth of this matter, and that man, whomsoever he may be, shall be the master of her heart, her wealth, and her country. You have now heard everything, and must see if you can bring your intelligence to bear on the affair. Then undertake the journey towards Nimroz, or else refuse, and depart to your home, never to see the princess more." I answered, "If God wills, I shall do as this heart of mine dictates. I shall go to that strange and doleful city. But," I continued, "if the princess will condescend to listen to me from the other side of her curtain, and hear with her own ears my request, my heart will be at ease." So the dignified old female servant took the message, and soon I was brought to the apartment where the princess lived. Ah, what a feast of beauty I saw all around, for each of her servants was more beautiful than the last. From Kalmuk, Turkestan, Abyssinia, Uzbek Tartary and Kashmir, they stood in two lines, dressed in rich clothes and jewels, their arms crossed in respect upon their breasts. I was given a jewelled stool to sit upon, and the slave sat down upon a sandalwood one. "Say what you have to say," she said. I extolled the princess's justice, tolerance, and liberality, and added, "Ever since I came here, I have been shown hospitality and generosity of the highest order. I have been given all the finest gifts in the city, but I realize that if this is done for all pilgrims and visitors, sums incalculable must be spent. From whence comes such wealth? Why does it not dry up in time? If the princess would explain this to me, then I can set out for Nimroz with a happy spirit and peace of mind." From behind the curtain came the princess's voice. "O young man, if you desire to know more, then stay here today also. In the evening I shall send for you again and tell you the secret of my riches." I went back to the palace where I was staying and waited impatiently. Sure enough, after I had eaten of a repast sent on a tray by the princess, I was summoned again. I went along with the old woman as before, and was led to the harem. A cloth covered with gold embroidery was laid on rich carpets, with a bolster studded with jewels. Trees made of jewels were placed all around, standing in pots of gold. On left and right, beautiful slaves of all nationalities were waiting with folded arms and downcast eyes. Dancing women and singers with ready-tuned instruments were already beginning their performances. "Is it always thus at the princess's court?" I asked. "Sometimes it is even greater than this," was the reply. "Sit you here. The princess is in another apartment. I will go and tell her you have arrived." So saying, the female slave disappeared. Soon I was told to go to the inner salon. My senses were reeling when I saw the beauty of the apartment. I could not tell which were doors and which were walls, for they were flashing and glistening with hundreds of mirrors and jewels, diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and so on, all set into the frames. At one end there was a curtain of the glossiest silk, behind which the princess was sitting. The servant said to me, "Listen, O intelligent one. The Sultan of this country was a great man. He had 7 daughters of his house. One day, these 7 ladies were standing before him, dressed in the most wondrous jewels and satins. The ruler said to them, 'If you had not been princesses of this house, you might have been born into the home of some poor man. Thank God that your fate is to be my daughters, for your wealth depends wholly upon me.' 6 of the girls replied dutifully, 'Dear father, whatever your majesty says is true. We are indeed entirely dependent upon your royal life, and our happiness is from you alone.' But the 7th, the princess behind the curtain, stood silent and did not say what her other sisters had said. The king was angry and said, 'Daughter, you say nothing. What is the reason for your silence?' 'What the great writer has written in my book of life will be the same whatever I say, and that will never be influenced by anyone. Whatever that is written, and it shall come to pass,' she answered. The king was furious at this speech and said angrily, 'What great words come from such a little mouth? You shall be stripped of all your jewels and set down in a wilderness, and we shall see then what is written in your book of destiny.' At the midnight hour, the poor princess, who had been brought up in the very lap of luxury, was carried away by porters in a litter, and set down in a desolate place, indicated by her father, and there abandoned. Praying for help, the princess eventually fell asleep, assured in her heart of God's protection. The unfortunate princess spent 3 days and nights alone, during which time not a morsel of food nor a drop of water passed her lips, and she became as withered as a dried thorn. Her beautiful skin became as yellow as turmeric, and her eyes were almost closed. On the morning of the 4th day, an ancient hermit appeared, dressed in green robes. Seeing the unhappy girl, he said, 'O daughter, though your father is the king, yet these sorrows were written in your destiny.' Then, whatever food he had in his knapsack, he laid before her, and off he went in search of water. He found a well, but had no bucket, so he made a cup from some leaves from a tree, took off his girdle, and let down the cup and pulled up some water. Every morning the old man went to the nearest city to beg, and thereafter brought back some morsels every day for the princess to eat. A few more days passed. One day she was combing her hair, when a pearl set with a diamond fell out. This she gave to the hermit to sell next day in the city. He brought back the money for the jewel, and the princess asked him to help her make a sort of dwelling. 'O daughter,' said he, 'you begin to dig the foundations, and I will go and get some clay to bake some bricks for a room for you.' So the princess began to dig, and deep in the earth she found a door. She cleared away the soil, and lo, a room full of gold and jewellery was beneath. She took several handfuls of the gold and closed the door again, covering it with earth. When the hermit came back, the princess said, 'Bring stonemasons and builders, and good workmen of all kinds, so that we may make a fine building here, on this spot.' The hermit brought workpeople, and soon a palace was constructed of such wonderful proportions that at last got to the ears of the king, the princess's father. He sent one of his nobles to her, saying, 'I wish to know who you are, and from what part of the world you come, and what is your family.' So the princess took pen and paper and wrote, 'O protector of the world, be pleased to come here and visit me, so that the sun of your presence may illuminate this humble spot.' She made rich gifts to the nobleman who had brought her father's letter, and sent him back with her reply. When the day came for the king's visit, all was prepared as for a wedding feast, and the princess with her ladies waited to receive him. 2 horses and 10 elephants, their saddles and harness set with precious gems, were ready for him as presents, and shawls, brocades, and carpets of great price. She presented these to his majesty, and waited before him with veiled head and folded arms. "Of what country are you a native, and why do you live here?" asked the monarch. "I am the one who offended your majesty, and was sent away to the wilderness," said she, throwing off her veil. So her father's heart was touched, and he embraced her, but he was most astonished at all he saw. He sent a message to the queen and the 6 other princesses that they should come at once. When they arrived, they all wept with joy to see her so well and happy, and praised God. The princess gave her mother and sisters such presents that they could scarcely believe their eyes. When eventually the king died, the people of the country elected her to the throne, and everyone was delighted at the choice. Now you have heard the princess's story. If you still intend to go to Nimroz, you should depart soon." I replied, "I am going this very moment, and, if God wills, I shall be back soon." So I set off. In about a year's time, after much difficulty, I at last arrived at the city of Nimroz. All the people were dressed in mourning, whether peasants or of noble birth, and were weeping almost continually. On the first day of the month, the multitude assembled on the plain. I went along in my pilgrim robe to see the strange occurrence which had been described to me in Damascus. Suddenly, a young man, mounted on a dun-coloured bull, galloped up. The young man, according to his usual custom, did what he had to do, and rode off again. I passed another month, counting one day after another, awaiting the man mounted on the bull. At last it was the first day of the month again, and I determined that this time I would do something decisive. What that was, I could not yet imagine. But though I tried to rush forward as soon as the man struck the slave with the sword, several people caught hold of my arms and legs and restrained me, saying, "What are you trying to do? Do you want to perish too?" I begged them to let me go, but they would not release me until the young man had gone away on the bull once more. When that month passed, too, I now awaited the next. The young man came as before, and performed the same acts. As he remounted, I followed him eagerly, avoiding anyone who tried to stop me. The young man, hearing the sound of my feet, turned around and gave a loud shout, threatening me with the sword. He was just about to strike when I joined both my hands in salute, and with bowed head stood before him. "O pilgrim, why would you cast your life away?" he asked. He then threw a golden dagger, set with jewels, and with a jewelled tassel towards me, and added, "At the moment I have nothing to give you but this. Carry this to the king, and you will get anything for which you ask." So saying, he rode on, but I followed. He again turned around and seemed about to put me to death. I stretched out my neck and said, "Do strike. I forgive you my blood." He replied, "Why do you bring down your blood upon my head and make me a criminal? Go, leave me." But I still followed. After about 2 miles, we came to a house. The young man shouted, a door opened, and he went in. "Oh God," I thought, "what do I do now?" At that a slave came out and said, "Come in, he calls you to his presence." I entered, and went with him to the garden. At last he led me to a place where the young man was sitting. He signed me to sit, and I did with as much dignity as I could. What should I see but the young man with the tools of a goldsmith on his lap, and in his hand a vase made of emeralds. When he stood up, all the slaves rose from their places and hid themselves in cupboards. I also hid in a closet from fear of what might be going to happen. The young man got up, and having chained all the doors, began to beat the bull which he usually rode. The noise of the animal's bellowing was dreadful to hear, and I ran from my hiding place. Then from another vantage point I saw him stroke the bull's back and kiss it, and throw away the club which he had used to beat it. Then he gave it something to eat, and came towards me. I hid myself in the room again. The young man unfastened the chains of all the doors. The servants entered with a small carpet, a wash basin, and a water pot. After washing his hands and face, he stood to pray. When he had finished, he called out, "Where is the pilgrim?" I stood before him. Then dinner was served, and we had a wonderful feast. When it was all finished, he said, "Friend, what is it that makes you seek your death?" I told him all the adventures of my life, from beginning to end, and ended. "Through you, I have hope of attaining my heart's desire." On hearing this, he said, "Oh, he only knows the pain of love who has felt the pangs." And I saw from his anguish that he too was in an agony of love. I said, "I have told you all my troubles. Now please relate to me yours, and I will hear you out with patience." He at once began.